the first thing I saw was not panic or smoke or the medical drone screaming across the ceiling. It was a human eating a sandwich in the middle of a room designed to make warriors quit. That was the part my brain refused to accept. The Deathworld conditioning chamber had been active for 12 minutes, and by then, every reasonable species in Training Cohort 7 had either dropped to one knee, curled against the floor, or started making the quiet little sounds cadets make when pride leaves the body. I was still standing, barely, because I am Ral Vexer, third-ranked survival cadet of the Orion Exchange Academy. And until that morning I believed that meant something. The air tasted like copper. The floor rolled under my boots with artificial tremors. The gravity had climbed to 1.8 standard, which, translated for humans, was almost twice what most soft-world species could tolerate for more than a few minutes. Warning lights flashed red across the chamber walls. Instructor Varn's voice hammered through the speakers, calm and cruel. Maintain posture. Control breathing. Adapt or fail. Around me, the strongest cadets in the academy were failing beautifully. Korn of the Brath Collective had 6 legs, and all of them were shaking. Savax, who came from a predator moon where children were supposedly taught to hunt before they could speak, had both hands pressed over his ears because the chamber was playing simulated territorial calls from 12 hostile species at once. The twin Yulari champions, famous for winning 3 inter-school endurance trials, were flat on their backs, staring at the ceiling like they had just discovered religion. And then there was the human. Caleb Brooks, 5 feet 10 inches tall, maybe 170 pounds. Brown hair, gray academy jumpsuit tied loose at the waist like he had missed laundry day and stopped caring. No armor plates, no breathing mask, no stabilizer bands, no visible concern. He sat on a fake basalt rock near the center of the simulation zone with one knee up, lunch tray balanced across it, carefully peeling the wrapper off what appeared to be a turkey sandwich. I remember thinking the translation system had malfunctioned, not because he spoke. He had not spoken yet, because his entire existence in that moment translated wrong. Everyone else was fighting the room. Caleb looked like he was waiting at an airport gate in Denver after a delayed flight. A medical drone zipped past his shoulder, scanning him twice, then hesitated as if embarrassed by its own results. Green light. Stable. It moved on. Instructor Varn noticed. So did I? So did every cadet still conscious enough to feel insulted. The human took one bite, chewed thoughtfully, and glanced up at the storm simulation forming over our heads. The chamber had just added freezing rain, high-altitude wind, and low oxygen pulses. The kind of layered stress test that made veteran officers file complaints. Caleb swallowed, wiped a crumb from his thumb, and said in a perfectly normal voice, "Is this the hard part, or are we still warming up?" That was when the room went quiet. Not because the chamber stopped. It did not. The wind kept screaming. The floor kept shaking. The alarms kept flashing. But every living thing in that room understood something at the same time. The Deathworld training had broken everyone. The human had only noticed his lunch was getting cold. Before that morning, the only thing I knew about humans came from academy briefings, cafeteria jokes, and one very confident xenobiology instructor who had once described Earthborn anatomy as a compromise made under pressure. The file on Caleb Brooks had been displayed for the entire cohort during orientation, right between emergency vacuum protocols and a reminder not to lick unknown minerals in the geology lab. Human male. Earth origin. Exchange cadet. Height, 5 feet 10 inches. Weight, 172 pounds. Skeletal structure calcium-based. External armor, none. Natural weapons, none worth classifying. Venom, none. Redundant organs, limited. Environmental tolerance, inconsistent. The instructor had paused there and made a sound that his species used for polite amusement. Inconsistent was academy language for probably fragile, but politically inconvenient to say out loud. I remember the room laughing. Not loudly, not cruelly, just with that soft academic confidence that comes from being told you are better by a screen with official formatting. We had students from methane valleys, pressure seas, volcanic ridge colonies, frozen moons, and one species that considered open flame a relaxing household feature. Compared to them, humans looked unfinished. Their skin changed color under stress. Their eyes leaked water when overwhelmed. Their joints bent in only a few useful directions. Their immune systems reacted dramatically to tiny particles in the air, which we had been told was called allergies, a word that sounded less like a condition and more like an excuse. Caleb had stood in the back of the hall that day, hands in his pockets, listening to the presentation as if it were about someone else. When the slide listed human weaknesses, he did not argue. When someone asked whether humans needed padded furniture to prevent accidental injury, he only smiled a little. That annoyed me more than if he had been offended. A weak species should at least have the dignity to know it was weak. Instructor Varn had been even less impressed. He told us Earth was classified as a death world due to weather instability, biological competition, heavy gravity, aggressive microorganisms, and what the database called recreational risk behavior. Then he looked directly at Caleb and said classification does not equal competence. I like that sentence. We all did. It made the universe feel orderly again. A dangerous planet might produce a lucky survivor, but luck was not training. Luck did not build discipline. Luck did not teach breath control, posture, pain management, or adaptive focus under artificial crisis conditions. That was what the Academy was for. That was what separated civilized combat scholars from creatures that climbed out of bad ecosystems and called it evolution. Caleb had simply nodded, like Varn had made a fair point. No challenge. No proud speech about humanity. No dramatic warning. He just opened a small paper bag, pulled out an apple, and took a bite during the silence after the briefing. I remember thinking it was disrespectful. Now, standing in the chamber with my lungs working too hard and my confidence shrinking by the second, I understood the memory differently. Caleb had not been ignoring the insult. He had been saving his energy. Humans, we had been told, were delicate. The mistake was assuming delicate meant breakable. Some things look delicate because they do not need to advertise what holds them together. The chamber had a reputation long before Caleb Brooks ever walked into it with a paper lunch bag and the relaxed expression of someone who had missed the seriousness of the occasion. We called it the Garden Breaker, not officially, of course. Officially, it was the Multi-Environment Adaptive Survival Theater, a name so boring it could make danger sound like paperwork. But every cadet knew what it really was. It was where confidence went to embarrass itself. Instructor Varn loved that room the way some people love old sports cars or expensive coffee. He talked about it with pride. He polished its control console himself. He had personally selected every climate pattern, every gravity shift, every sound frequency, every balance disruption, and every harmless but deeply unpleasant atmospheric compound that made your senses question your life choices. Nothing inside was meant to permanently harm a cadet. The Academy had rules, insurance committees, and parents with lawyers. But comfort was not protected. Pride was not protected. Reputation was absolutely not protected. The room could make a desert species shiver in 50-degree wind. It could make a deep-sea species feel exposed under artificial sunlight. It could tilt the floor by 3 inches without warning, then add a crosswind strong enough to move a lunch tray, but not strong enough to count as unsafe. That was the genius of it. Every condition was survivable. Every condition was legal. Stacked together, they became personal. Varn told us the chamber did not attack bodies. It exposed assumptions. A cadet who relied on size learned size did not help when the ground moved wrong. A cadet who relied on hearing learned sound could become clutter. A cadet who relied on perfect temperature control learned that the universe did not care about preferred settings. Before our turn began, Varn stood in front of the sealed doors with his silver instructor badge bright against his black uniform and gave the speech we had all been waiting for. This assessment has ended scholarships, humbled champions, and rewritten species tolerance charts, he said. You will not impress it. You will not negotiate with it. You will adapt, or you will request extraction. Then his eyes moved briefly to Caleb. Some of you may believe planetary classification grants special privilege. It does not. I remember how several cadets turned to look at the human, expecting some reaction. Caleb was checking the label on a carton of chocolate milk. Varn mistook that for nervous avoidance. I mistook it for disrespect. Neither of us understood that Caleb had already heard the important part and filed it away under not my first bad morning. The doors opened with a deep hydraulic sigh. Cold vapor rolled out across our boots. The lights inside flickered between storm gray and emergency amber. The floor plates shifted like the surface of a ship in rough water. Somewhere overhead, speakers produced a low, distant rumble that felt less like weather and more like a warning from the building itself. My pulse quickened. Savax grinned to show he was not afraid. Corin flexed all 6 legs. The Yalari twins whispered a focus chant. Caleb stepped through last, looked around the room, and said, "Huh, this kind of reminds me of summer camp in Colorado." Nobody laughed, because none of us knew whether that was a joke. 10 minutes later, that sentence would become the most terrifying thing he had said all day. The first failure came from the cadet most certain he would not fail. Savax had spent the entire walk to the chamber telling anyone within earshot that predator-born nervous systems were built for chaos. He said fear was a garden world defect. He said artificial stress could not compare to the hunting storms of his moon. He said all of this while flexing his claws against his palms and smiling at Caleb like the human was a field trip animal that had learned to wear shoes. 3 minutes after the assessment began, Savax stopped smiling. The chamber did not do anything dramatic at first. That was what made it worse. The temperature dropped from 72 degrees to 49. The lights dimmed by 15%. The floor began to tilt in slow, almost polite waves. A dry wind moved from left to right, carrying the bitter smell of mineral dust and something sharp enough to sting the back of the throat. Varn's voice came through the speakers. Phase 1. Balance, breath, orientation. Simple words. Cruel words. Corin tried to stabilize with all 6 legs and discovered the floor plates were shifting under each foot at slightly different speeds. His species came from flat salt plains where the horizon stayed honest. This room gave him no honest surface to trust. He lasted 4 minutes before lowering himself carefully to the ground, not injured, not defeated officially, just suddenly very interested in breathing without falling sideways. The Yalari twins did better until the humidity changed. Their home atmosphere was warm and constant, like a greenhouse maintained by obsessive engineers. The chamber gave them cold wind, then warm fog, then cold wind again. Their focus chant broke apart 1 syllable at a time. One twin raised a hand for extraction with the quiet dignity of someone watching a scholarship drift away. The other followed 6 seconds later. Nobody mocked them. We were too busy realizing they had been the smart ones. I kept moving because stopping felt like admitting fear. My boots dragged across the textured floor. My chest tightened with every low oxygen pulse. Each pulse lasted only a few seconds, but the timing was irregular, like the room had learned how to interrupt confidence. Across the simulation zone, Caleb had found a flat section of rock near a projected pine tree and sat down. He was not bracing. He was not calculating angles. He was unwrapping a second half of his sandwich with the patient focus of a man determined not to let bad weather ruin lunch. A gust of wind lifted the corner of his napkin. Caleb caught it with 2 fingers, tucked it under his carton, and kept chewing. That tiny movement bothered me more than Corin collapsing to the floor. It was too casual, too practiced, like the chamber was not testing him, like it was mildly inconveniencing him. Then the predator calls began. Deep, layered sounds rolled through the speakers, designed to trigger threat recognition across multiple species. Savax froze. His shoulders rose. His breathing turned quick and shallow. This was supposed to be his advantage, but the chamber had found something older than pride, something beneath training. He did not request extraction. He simply sat down very slowly, eyes wide, ears flattened, every boast from earlier evaporating into the artificial storm. Instructor Varn watched from behind the observation glass without expression, but I saw one of his hands tighten behind his back. He had expected weakness from the human. He had expected drama from the predators. He had not expected the strongest cadets to fold in order while Caleb Brooks brushed crumbs off his knee. I staggered past the human's rock, angry enough to speak and tired enough to regret it. "How are you doing that?" I asked. Caleb looked up at me, genuinely confused. "Doing what?" The wind screamed louder. The lights flashed amber. Another cadet requested extraction behind me. Caleb glanced toward the ceiling as if noticing the storm for the first time, then shrugged. "I guess I have eaten lunch in worse weather." By minute 14, the chamber had stopped feeling like a test and started feeling like a personal argument with physics. The floor leveled suddenly, which should have been relief, but nobody trusted relief in Varn's favorite machine. Relief was usually the setup. The lights shifted from amber to a clean surgical white. The wind cut off. The predator calls faded into silence. For 2 seconds, all we heard was breathing, alarms from medical drones, and Caleb Brooks folding the wax paper around the edge of his sandwich so the filling would not fall out. Then the ceiling opened. Not physically, but visually. The projection dome above us turned into a sky the color of old metal, heavy with rotating cloud bands. Static crawled across my skin. The chamber announced Phase 2. Sensory interference. Atmospheric instability. Cognitive distraction. Varn had saved that for after the first wave of cadets weakened, because he believed discipline was easiest to measure when the mind was tired. A sweet chemical scent entered the air, harmless but irritating, designed to confuse smell-based orientation. Thin pulses of light flashed at uneven intervals. The floor began emitting low vibrations through our boots, not enough to knock anyone down, just enough to make every joint feel slightly misplaced. I clenched my teeth and focused on the blue marker line painted across the far wall. Do not look at the lights. Do not follow the sound. Do not breathe too deeply. Standard training. Standard survival. Very standard misery. Caleb raised his hand. That alone was offensive. Nobody raised a hand inside Phase 2. Cadets endured, requested extraction, or quietly questioned their career path. Varn's voice came through the speaker, sharper than before. Cadet Brooks, state your emergency. Caleb looked around, as if checking whether the question was for someone else. It is not an emergency, sir. I was just wondering whether anyone has salt. The silence that followed was so complete that even the drones seemed to pause. Salt, Varn repeated. Yes, sir, Caleb said. Or hot sauce, if that is easier. The turkey is kind of bland. Somewhere behind me, a half-conscious Yalari made a small sound that might have been despair. I stared at the human, waiting for the joke to reveal itself. His face gave me nothing. No smirk. No challenge. No heroic defiance. Just mild disappointment in institutional catering. Varn did not speak for several seconds, and that was when I first realized the instructor was not amused. He was embarrassed. Not loudly. Not visibly. But the chamber was his masterpiece, his proof that training could humble every species equally. Caleb had just treated it like a cafeteria with dramatic lighting. Cadet Brooks, Varn said at last, this is an active survival assessment. I understand that, sir. Then explain why you are eating. Caleb glanced down at his tray. Because lunch period ends at 1300 hours, sir. The observation glass darkened slightly as the instructor adjusted something on his console. I knew that gesture. Every cadet knew that gesture. It meant Varn had decided a lesson needed emphasis. Around the chamber, wall panels rotated open, revealing black environmental vents. Medical drones lifted higher. The Academy safety system chimed once, polite and nervous. Instructor authorization required for individualized difficulty adjustment. Varn gave it without hesitation. Approved. My stomach dropped. Caleb finally stopped chewing. Not because he was afraid. Because a gust from the new vents had pushed his napkin against his sleeve. He peeled it off carefully, set it under his milk carton again, and looked toward the glass. Sir, is this about the salt? Varn's reply came cold and smooth. No, Cadet Brooks. This is about respect. The chamber focused on the human. I felt it happen. The pressure shifted away from us like a storm choosing a new town. The lights above Caleb narrowed. The rock beneath him locked into place. A circle of red indicators formed around his section of the floor. Gravity adjustment. Heat variance. Oxygen pulse. Irritant mist. Acoustic layering. The system listed each change with cheerful professionalism, as if announcing features on a new family car. The rest of us watched from our own private exhaustion as the machine prepared to correct the human's attitude. Caleb looked at the unfinished half of his sandwich, then at the red warning circle, then back at the observation glass. Okay, he said, and sighed like a man whose lunch break had been interrupted by a fire drill. The individualized adjustment began with gravity, because Instructor Varn believed every species told the truth under weight. Caleb's red circle pulsed once, and the chamber announced 2.3 standard gravity. My knees complained in sympathy, even though most of the load had shifted away from me. 2.3 was not a training setting. It was a formal apology waiting to happen. The medical drones spread into a wider ring, their soft blue lights blinking faster now, ready to intervene the moment the human body did what every file in the Academy database said it should do. Caleb should have lowered his head. He should have braced both hands against the rock. He should have shown some visible sign that the universe had placed a firm hand on his shoulders and told him to sit down. Instead, he adjusted his lunch tray so it would not slide. That was all. One small movement. Calm. Practical. Infuriating. Varn increased heat variance next. The air around Caleb shimmered, jumping from cold mountain wind to dry desert warmth in rolling waves. Most species needed gradual acclimation for temperature shifts like that. Caleb blinked twice, rolled one shoulder, and unzipped the top of his academy jumpsuit by maybe 3 inches. Not dramatically, not defiantly, just the way an American might react when a restaurant patio heater turned on too close to the table. The oxygen pulses followed, thin and uneven, designed to make the brain doubt the lungs. I had trained for that drill for 6 months and still hated it with a private, spiritual intensity. Caleb breathed through his nose. Slow in, slow out. He looked bored. No, not bored. Patient. That was worse. Boredom can be arrogance. Patience is experience. The irritant mist came last, glittering in the chamber lights like silver dust. It was safe, academy approved, and famous for making cadets cough, blink, and lose focus at exactly the wrong time. Caleb sniffed once. His eyebrows lifted. For one beautiful second, I thought the room had finally found him. Then he said, "That smells like my uncle's garage." Nobody knew what that meant. Nobody wanted to know. Varn's posture behind the glass changed. He leaned closer to the console. The machine was reporting normal human vitals. Not heroic vitals. Not impossible vitals. Normal. Heart rate elevated within acceptable range. Respiratory rhythm stable. Balance correction stable. Stress markers present but controlled. The chamber did not know how to insult him with data, so it simply kept printing the truth. Stable. 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 Around me, the remaining cadets watched the readouts with the stunned resentment of students seeing someone pass an exam they had not studied for. Except Caleb had not studied either. He had packed lunch. Corin, still seated near the extraction line, made a weak clicking sound. Is he using equipment? Savax asked, voice rough from the earlier sensory phase. Varn heard him. I saw the instructor's eyes narrow. Cadet Brooks, raise both hands away from your tray. Caleb looked down at his sandwich, then carefully set it back on the paper wrapper. He raised both hands, palms open. The tray remained balanced across his knee in 2.3 gravity, held in place by nothing but careful positioning and an apparently offensive understanding of friction. Scanners swept over him from 4 directions. No implants beyond the Academy translator. No stabilizers. No chemical boosters. No hidden environmental shield. No unauthorized technology. The system confirmed it out loud, because apparently humiliation had become a public service. Caleb lowered his hands when Varn gave permission. Then he picked up his milk carton and gave it a small shake. Empty. He looked genuinely disappointed for the first time all day. Instructor Varn stared at him through the glass. The chamber had been made worse. Much worse. And somehow, the first thing it had successfully taken from the human was his drink. The truth did not arrive with a speech. It arrived as a calibration error. At first, the chamber tried to classify Caleb the way it classified everyone else, by species profile, home gravity, atmospheric preference, stress tolerance, and emergency extraction threshold. The Academy loved categories. Categories made the galaxy feel safe. Categories told instructors which students needed oxygen supplements, which needed humidity support, which needed shaded lighting, and which needed reminders not to panic when exposed to open sky. Caleb Brooks ruined the categories by sitting calmly inside the worst part of the test and looking mildly disappointed about his empty milk carton. The main console behind the observation glass flashed yellow. Varn looked down so quickly that I knew something had gone wrong. The chamber spoke in its smooth instructional voice. Recalibration recommended. Human baseline response inconsistent with current threat model. Varn's jaw tightened. Override recommendation, he said. Continue assessment. The console flashed again. Recalibration recommended. Current environment does not exceed subject adaptation history. That sentence moved through the room like cold water. I did not understand it. At first, neither did Corin, who lifted his head from the floor. Neither did Savax, whose ears slowly rose. Varn understood. I saw it in the way his hand stopped above the controls. Caleb looked toward the speaker. Sorry, what does adaptation history mean? Nobody answered him. The chamber answered anyway, because machines have no sense of drama and therefore sometimes create it perfectly. Accessing registered planetary environmental archive. Origin world, Earth. Regional exposure records incomplete. Probable developmental environment includes seasonal temperature variation, high allergen density, microbial saturation, storm activity, uneven terrain, recreational altitude exposure, urban acoustic stress, competitive physical activity, and routine gravitational load of 1 Earth standard. A map appeared on the chamber wall. Blue oceans, green continents, white storms curling over land masses like living things. Earth looked beautiful, which made the data beside it feel insulting. Lightning frequency, elevated. Weather volatility, elevated. Pathogen diversity, elevated. Predator history, elevated. Environmental unpredictability, elevated. Cultural risk normalization, extreme. That last line confused every alien in the room. Caleb coughed once, not from the mist, but because he was trying not to laugh. Varn noticed. Explain, Cadet Brooks. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. Well, sir, humans do a lot of dumb outdoor stuff for fun. The chamber processed that and projected images from Earth archives. Humans climbing cliffs. Humans running long races through mud. Humans skiing down frozen mountains. Humans camping in forests filled with insects, uneven ground, temperature drops, and suspicious noises after midnight. Humans sitting around controlled fire and calling it relaxing. The room watched in absolute silence. The Academy had built a machine to simulate layered environmental stress. Earth had marketed it as a weekend. My throat went dry. Not from the air. From understanding. The low oxygen pulses were altitude training. The shifting floor was a hiking trail. The cold rain was bad weather. The irritant mist was pollen season. The predator sounds were not normal to him, maybe, but the idea of ignoring strange sounds outside was apparently common enough that his heartbeat barely cared. Caleb had not defeated the chamber. He had recognized pieces of home, wearing a uniform. Varn tried one final adjustment. Increase cognitive load by 20%. The system refused. Warning. Current profile approaching recreational hardship equivalence for subject. Please specify desired training objective. Recreational. That word broke something in us more effectively than the gravity ever had. Caleb picked up the last half of his sandwich, studied it, and said, "For the record, sir, this would be a lot better with chips." No one laughed. We were too busy realizing the answer key had been standing in the room the whole time, chewing politely, while our greatest survival test asked him to remember summer. Varn should have stopped the assessment when the chamber asked for a training objective. That was the responsible choice. That was the Academy-approved choice. That was the choice every instructor handbook, safety committee, and common-sense organism in the galaxy would have recommended. Varn did not choose it. Pride is a quiet malfunction. It does not flash red. It does not request maintenance. It simply sits behind the eyes of a respected teacher and whispers that reality must be corrected because it has become embarrassing. Behind the observation glass, Varn straightened his uniform collar with 2 fingers and gave the console a command none of us had heard outside certification exams. Composite escalation, instructor authority, narrow field, Cadet Brooks only. The chamber paused. I swear it paused. Not because machines hesitate, but because even the machines seemed to understand that this was no longer education. This was an argument between one instructor and a lunch break. The red circle around Caleb brightened. The projection sky above him thickened into rolling gray. Temperature dropped, then rose, then dropped again. The floor under his rock tilted 4 degrees, corrected itself, and tilted the other way. Wind came from 3 directions in rotating bursts. The air pressure shifted in small pulses that popped my inner ear from 30 feet away. The chamber layered distant thunder, insect noise, rain static, engine hum, and a low rumble that made every rib in my chest feel tuned to the wrong station. Caleb looked up slowly. For the first time all day, he seemed concerned. Not frightened. Concerned. His sandwich wrapper had lifted at one corner and was threatening to unfold. He placed his empty milk carton on top of it like a paperweight. That was his emergency procedure. The system increased again. The rock beneath him vibrated. His tray slid half an inch. Caleb caught it with his left hand without looking. The medical drones rotated in a circle above him, scanning, rescanning, disagreeing with themselves in soft electronic chirps. Stable. Elevated. Stable. Unusual. Stable. One drone drifted too close to the wind field and spun backward like a toy kite before correcting course. Corin made a tiny clicking sound that his translator rendered as absolutely not. Savax had stopped pretending to be brave. The Yalari twins watched from the extraction benches with the frozen attention of people seeing a myth draft itself in real time. Varn pushed the chamber one level higher. The console answered with a warning tone, polite at first, then less polite. Environmental combination exceeds standard cadet assessment range. Varn said, maintain. The floor plates around Caleb locked down. The storm projection sharpened until rain streaked sideways across the light. None of it was real water, not exactly, but the temperature and pressure changes were real enough to make my teeth ache. Caleb finally stood. The room reacted like a sacred animal had moved. He rose smoothly under the gravity, holding the tray in one hand, napkin pinned beneath his thumb. His knees did not shake. His breathing stayed even. He took one step off the rock and looked down at his lunch. A small line of mustard had escaped the sandwich and touched his sleeve. That, somehow, was what changed his expression. He sighed. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was the exhausted disappointment of a man whose day had become unnecessarily inconvenient. Sir, he called toward the glass, I am going to need another napkin. The chamber answered before. Varn could. Cooling vent overload. Acoustic array desynchronized. Gravity field correction unstable. Please reduce composite load. Varn stared at the console as if betrayal had a user interface. He tried to stabilize the field manually. The lights flickered. The storm stuttered. 1 second Caleb stood beneath simulated mountain weather. The next, the projection glitched into bright sunshine, then fog, then what appeared to be a peaceful beach, then back to storm. Caleb glanced around. Nice, he said. Kind of like Florida. The main console produced a long, defeated tone. Assessment suspended for equipment preservation. Not cadet preservation. Equipment preservation. That phrase landed harder than any alarm. The room had not saved Caleb from the test. It had saved the test from Caleb. The red circle vanished. The wind died. The artificial sky cleared. Caleb looked at his tray, then at the stunned academy, then back at Varn. So, he asked, is lunch still happening, or did I miss it? Behind me, someone whispered a word my translator rendered as impossible. I knew better by then. Impossible was just what the galaxy called humans before updating the file. The official report was published 3 hours later, and it lied with the kind of careful language only institutions can afford. It said the assessment had been suspended due to unexpected calibration variance. It said Cadet Caleb Brooks had demonstrated unusual environmental resilience. It said Instructor Varn had acted within acceptable safety discretion, which was technically true in the same way calling a hurricane a weather pattern is technically true. What the report did not say was that Varn sat in his office afterward for 47 minutes without turning on the lights. It did not say that the maintenance team found the chamber's adaptive model still trying to build a training profile for one ordinary human from Colorado and repeatedly refusing to save the file because the data looked unreasonable. It did not say that every cadet in Cohort 7 walked a little farther around Caleb in the cafeteria, not because we disliked him, but because our brains had not yet decided what distance was respectful. Caleb did not help the situation. He behaved exactly the same. That was the worst part. A proper monster should reveal itself, glow ominously, speak in riddles, or at least look pleased when a room full of elite students realizes it has been wrong. Caleb bought another milk carton, found a fresh napkin, and asked the kitchen staff whether they had barbecue chips. When they said no, he accepted plain chips with quiet disappointment. Savax apologized to him first. Not dramatically. He simply walked over, lowered his head, and said his earlier assumptions had been incorrect. Caleb looked confused for half a second, then shrugged and said, "No problem, man." That phrase spread through the academy faster than the report. No problem. The same words humans apparently used for spilled drinks, delayed shuttles, bad weather, and being underestimated by entire civilizations. Corin asked Caleb what Earth survival training looked like. Caleb said he had never taken survival training, unless Boy Scouts counted. We all searched Boy Scouts within 5 seconds. The database returned images of small human children tying knots, hiking through forests, sleeping outside, building fires, and earning colorful badges for activities our safety board would have classified as supervised environmental exposure. Savax stared at the images for a long time and whispered, "They start them young." Instructor Varn did return to class the next morning, but he was different. He did not apologize. Varn was not built for apology. Instead, he changed the name of the chamber exercise from Advanced Multi-Environment Adaptation to Introductory Terran Baseline Comparison. That was his way of surrendering with paperwork. The new warning label appeared on the door by noon. Human participation requires separate equipment insurance review. Caleb laughed when he saw it. The rest of us did not. We had finally learned that Earth was not frightening because it produced warriors. Warriors exist everywhere. Earth was frightening because it produced people who could walk through controlled misery, call it familiar, and still worry more about lunch than legacy. I used to believe humans were delicate because they lacked obvious weapons, armor, venom, or elegant biological design. I was wrong. They were not designed elegantly. They were assembled by storms, gravity, allergens, bad roads, competitive games, stubborn families, unpredictable weather, and a planet that treated comfort like an optional upgrade. The chamber broke champions because it copied hardship. Caleb Brooks had grown up inside the original. That is why, years later, when new cadets ask me what happened that day, I do not tell them the machine failed. Machines fail all the time. I tell them the truth. We built a room to imitate a death world, placed one human inside it, and discovered the room was homesick before he was.